Welcome to the Shadow the Script podcast. This is your host, Jared May. Hey, look, we got a chance to go to Texas A&M over this past weekend with the Accountant and Noble Six, two of my really good friends, and get to watch A&M beat Auburn at home 16-10. Although with A&M's rushing attack and how the defense dominated for the Aggies, the scoreboard did not dictate that football game. But we'll be covering that later in this episode. 4 top 10 teams in college football suffered a loss this week, whether against a ranked opponent or not. This was a special weekend. So the college football edition starts here, week 5, transitioning into week 6, and we are getting closer and closer into kind of the middle of the season, and it's going by a little too quickly for my own good. So, but if you're not following on the socials, make sure to search at Shadow the Script to follow our YouTube to get notifications on new episodes such as these. We'll be rolling out clips on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can search at Shadow the Script as well on those, or click the link tree in our bio to find all other ways to watch, listen, and view our content. And we appreciate I'm up to 65 subscribers on YouTube, and I want to thank each and every one of you guys for your contributions. I know this has kind of been a grind as an independent creator, and to kind of grow an independent platform. So really any and all followers and reposts and all that kind of stuff helps. And I really appreciate you guys' support. And for those of you that still believe in me. Look, Texas A&M just moved to number 6 in the rankings after the AP poll released this Monday, or I think probably on Sunday. And it's the first time Texas A&M has been 4-0 since the 2016 season. And boy, I mean, I know Mike Elko was pretty heated in the press conference post game when they were asking about the scoreboard and this, that, and the other. And he says, why don't you talk about the good things that happened in the game, such as we had over 230 yards on the ground. We had sacks galore against Jackson Arnold. A lot of those came on third downs. Very pivotal moments throughout the game. The defense really stepped up. You want to talk about the touchdowns that were called back, what we can erase, the field goal opportunities that we had before the half and in the second half and early in the game, just all throughout the board. And, all it takes is a little bit of execution, but to come away with the dub, even after all those things sort of failed in a way, if you look at it in hindsight, it was still a stellar performance by the defense and by the rushing attack for Texas A&M. And it goes to show that Jackson Arnold, what I said about him last week, and I know it was a kind of a short clip, and everyone will look at me and say, well, who's this Joe Schmo talking about Jackson Arnold, and why is he the authority on college football quarterbacks or quarterbacks in general, if at all? And it's the non-player argument. I understand it. Although I'm not some nerd behind a computer looking at film going, I'm gonna nitpick every single error that he does and then go on my channel and say, here's what it's supposed to be. This is 50 protection scheme. He's got a tight end here chipping the edge, and PFF says no. I don't do any of that. I watch the pocket, I watch the accuracy, I watch the play type, the scheme, and I think to myself, Jackson Arnold does not have what it takes to be a passer. Not only, of course, at the next level from where he's at currently, but he couldn't do it at Oklahoma. He hasn't been able to do it in Auburn, and maybe he's still young and there's still some growth opportunities there. But Texas A&M, who has not been renowned for a strong defense thus far in the SEC, let alone this season, giving up 22 to Utah State, 20-plus to UTSA. They gave up 40 to Notre Dame. And then at home, they come in here and let Jackson Arnold get 3 points. And we're going to call it 10, but that came with a tipped pick interception off the dome of a screen pass that was returned to the 3-yard line. Shout out to Marcel Reed to at least get down there and get a tackle. And then Jackson Arnold runs it in for 3 yards, and he's flexing on the field, telling us to hush. So I don't know. I look at that game and I said he wasn't able to complete anything. It was inaccurate. It was off rhythm. He sat in the pocket, just kind of embracing the pressure, knowing that, hey, if my offensive line is going to absorb some pressure, I should probably get it out sooner rather than later. And it just didn't translate on the field. So I look at that and I go, you guys laughed at me. Some of you said, oh, he's not the authority on quarterbacks. But then I was proven right once again. I've talked up Marcel Reed to say he looks a lot like Jaden Daniels at LSU. He's in the Heisman candidacy conversation. I talked about Ty Simpson looking really solid, and I know they were in trouble the last 2-3 weeks, but coming into Georgia and him being an absolute field general archetype type quarterback, which is what I alluded to in sort of a satirical tweet, but at the same time I meant it. There's a lot to talk about, and so that's kind of wipes the floor off at Texas A&M, and just some nuggets there. We got to go to the game. We were in there. We were at Aggie Park checking out all the tents and things like that. Met some really cool people. Did the whole dang dance. Had some pretty cool seats. Weather wasn't too bad. Texas A&M was alive and well that game with over 100,000 strong. And both of my buddies that came with me are Texas Longhorns fans. Neither went to Texas, but they were Texas Longhorns fans, and so they're with their plus ones and things like that, and they're talking about, oh yeah, I can't wait to see Kyle Field. I said, man, from the outside in, you can't understand it, and from the inside looking out, you can't explain it. So wait until you get in there and watch the game, watch the Aggie band, watch the yell leaders, and how we translate the calls from the front of the stadium to the back. Where do the students sit? Check the intro out. The intro is one of the top 5 intros in college football, you could argue. And just how loud it got on third down. They were giving me looks like, wow, this is an incredible atmosphere. And I know they had to bite their tongues on that, but they had a great time. I had a great time with them. I was glad to show them, and now I have to return the favor and probably need to go to a Texas Longhorn game up here in the future. But it was a phenomenal weekend. Had a ton of fun. Got to see Ella Langley and Zach Top at Hearn Municipal Airport for the At the Station concert, and Ella Langley performed 2 unreleased songs. She's phenomenal in concert. I highly suggest you guys go watch her. Very electric, kind of like an Ashley McBride hybrid, but sexier. And then Zach Top was absolutely phenomenal in concert. He was extraordinary, and he sang forever. But bro, my my feet were hurting, and we came out of that thing. I looked like I just played a game of Warzone. I had dust from head to toe. But Zach Top, his new album, all that kind of stuff, man, he was great. He was fantastic voice, especially live, and that's kind of how I like to judge an artist. I haven't seen Morgan Wallen yet. He's still one of my favorite artists out there, if not the. But I have seen Cody Johnson, and there's not much that tops him besides, watching Zach Top go out there and perform. I was highly, highly impressed. So, all right, let's get down to the nooks and crannies of college football here. I want to go by conference, okay? So we're going to get into the conference outlook, if you will, and then we're going to go skip straight into Week 6 projections. But I kind of want to shatter the script and debunk the mainstream media on what was talked about prior to this week and what we're talking about now. So, I go into the Big Ten outlook. Let's start off strong. Ohio State, I was going to say Julian Sayin, number 1 Ohio State from last week's poll. Washington is not a team to sleep on. I talked about it last week. I said that Ohio State would be able to handle them pretty easily, but they could be on upset alert. But Julian Sayin is going to have to win them some football games by himself. And so I really liked what Ryan Day is continuing to do at Ohio State. I know there's a lot of fluctuations with recruiting and NIL transitions and things like that, but they encountered some adversity prior to halftime and just kind of broke away as the game went on. And that's that durable, long-standing, been-there-before mentality that Ohio State continues to show under Ryan Day. And really, Washington's going to be an impressive Big Ten team, I think, this year if they continue what they've been doing on offensively. Although they were shut down. I mean, Matt Patricia is going to win an award. Let's talk about that for a second. Holding Texas to 7 points, Washington to 6 points. And then, of course, they've got some key pivotal Big Ten matchups coming up. But thus far this season, Matt Patricia is hands down the best defensive coordinator in the college football atmosphere. And that's he's won a championship obviously in the NFL, so that doesn't surprise me, especially going into a college atmosphere. But man, what a great hire by Ohio State, and I hope they continue to rumble and stumble onto the Big Ten and create some big-time matchups, possibly between Ohio State and what's looking like Oregon. But Indiana played a really close one. I noted that Indiana played down to their competition this week, and that might be because it's really tough to follow up on beating Illinois 63-10, knowing that Illinois was a top 10 team at the time, and I look at that game, and Fernando Mendoza has 18 total touchdowns and 1 turnover through the air thus far this season, and he is absolutely in the Heisman conversation. He's somebody to be looking at, keeping an eye out for, as Tommy Castellanos has kind of dipped in performance. Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson have kind of increasingly, they've just increased their stock for the Heisman candidacy and the Heisman race. So Fernando Mendoza and Curt Cignetti, that's a great combo over there. Indiana can really do some damage. I'm still not confident that if they went up against an Ohio State like they did last year, or I understand Notre Dame beat them in the playoffs, but I'm going to use them as an example. I just don't see, and maybe Fernando Mendoza and company can contradict me on this, and I kind of hope they do. It's fun to see these things in college football. That's why I prefer it over the NFL. I want to see Curt Cignetti and this Fernando Mendoza guy kind of get after it against these powerful Big Ten teams and maybe cause an upset and a little bit of an uproar to say, Indiana, they really like playing under this coach. They can compete in the Big Ten, and let's see what else they have in store for the playoffs sort of thing. But they are absolutely a dark horse contender to at least be in contention for a Big Ten championship. And it's good for college football. It's good for the argument of evening the scales. So shout out to Indiana. And, honestly, we got just a really quick shout out to Iowa's defense. I mean, I don't think really anybody's played them yet, notably, such as Iowa State and Indiana, where both of those teams were scoring no more than 20 points. So, and that's always been the case with Iowa. You go over there and you're like, well, shit, we got to play. They got no offense, but their defense could absolutely negate anything we have schemed offensively. 20-13 technically was the final score there, but Indiana escapes with a W, 20-15. Kind of a downfall in performance from the previous week in week 4. And then I'll do Illinois defeating USC. Now, I wanted to highlight this one because obviously I can't remember what I said, but I was hopeful that Illinois would respond to getting their back blown out against Indiana and to go in there against Lincoln Riley, who had a strong start to the season. And I put a nugget on there because I was like, hey, Lincoln Riley is now 4-11 versus ranked opponents since his tenure at USC. And it just, the narrative continues to boil up to say, well, we have this bias. So the ESPN FPI poll, which I figured out, is just basically data collection to say we're going to use analytics and AI to project where they're going to finish. And for them to be inside the top 10 was astronomically insane, and why you really can't depend on data collection driven polls and things like that. But Lincoln Riley, at this end of the day, it's a lot like the James Franklin thing, which we'll get into in a little bit here at Penn State. But Lincoln Riley, that's a terrible record, obviously, against ranked opponents. And so you look back and it's okay, well, we had Caleb Williams, got it. And we had, we thought Miller Moss, I believe was his name, was supposed to be a stud. But now you got this other cat who, granted the game was very close and it's high scoring, and they were high scoring against Michigan State as well. But just something's missing at USC, whether it's the ability to finish, whether it's the ability to have a defensive coach that complements Lincoln Riley, and he just hasn't found that match yet. Nevertheless, 4-11 is quite eye-opening for someone who is renowned to be basically the Heisman grower, if you will, the Heisman distributor, if you will. And so that'll be interesting to see and watch. That'll be interesting to see how Lincoln Riley's career and tenure at USC might become in question over time. And maybe already it is. Maybe he is already on the hot seat. But, the expectation for USC, I'm sure, is to be back to where they were prior to 2010 and prior to Sam Darnold and those people. So when they were playing for championships with Matt Leinart and people like that. All right, now the big one, the one everybody's been waiting for. Obviously, here we go. Oregon beats Penn State 30-24 in double overtime. Dan Lanning was high as hell on cocaine, by the way. That dude was gritting his teeth and shaking right and left. The only reason I know what it is because I've watched Quentin Tarantino movies and Miami Vice. This isn't Miami Vice, okay? Look, when I look at this game, I'd said this before. You look at Penn State, and there's just this boomer media bias with Penn State. It's all boomers. They're all like, well, Penn State's always been Penn State. We got to put them in the top 10. Well, preseason AP, Penn State exists. Let's put them at 3. They haven't played anybody since week 6, but this is the guy. These are the guys that we trust. James Franklin, 4-21 versus top 10 ranked opponents. 4-21. And we continue to put these guys in the top 10, whether it be in AP voting polls, preseason AP, power rankings, college football playoffs. And you go, and I know the Big Ten got a little bit stronger with the addition of Oregon, but when I look at Penn State, I'm like, all right, let's go look, at who they play. And you're going to look at this and go, well, they haven't played anybody yet. And I guess you could say the same thing for Oregon, but I guess the point I'm trying to get at is if you're 4-21 versus top 10 ranked opponents, and you consider Penn State's schedule going, okay, well, they have like 4 highlighted games per year, and typically those 4 highlighted games per year are top 10 ranked opponents, such as an Ohio State, such as, I guess over the last season and a half or 2 seasons, Oregon, and another Big Ten team that you can put in there. Probably Washington would be another one. But out of those 4 games over his tenure, right, these highlighted games within there, 4-21, that basically, what that tells me is that anytime Penn State has to go up against a premium opponent on their schedule, they lose. That's what it tells me. And so you look at their other games and you're like, well, of course they're going to win that game. They started off with Nevada. Then they played Florida International. Then they played Villanova. Then they had a week 4 bye. Then they go into play Oregon at home for a whiteout game, and Oregon stunts on them 30-24 in double OT. Well, luckily for them, they get to go play UCLA. And then after that, they play Northwestern. Then they play Iowa. Upset alert, right? Then a bye. Then here's their 2 games. It actually does get a little hard this year, but Nebraska's different. Michigan State, meh. But they play Ohio State and Indiana back-to-back. But I look at this schedule, and I think that's 3 games. That's 3 tough games. And it's not impressive. And, of course, I'm going to flip the script, and I'm going to talk about Oregon and say, wow, they're really impressive, but they're winning football games versus ranked opponents. Granted, they got blown out in the playoffs, and that was disappointing. But hell, I don't understand what we're talking about. It's this boomer bias, and I'm quite sick of it because it has bled into other conferences as well, and it even bled into a conference that has been a boomer biased conference, but some people joined in, and it's now like, well, we don't care what they've done in the past. They've got Arch Manning. Put him in the papers. That's not how it works. And granted, they had a great year last year with Quinn Ewers. But obviously, Penn State being one of the 4 top 10 losses this week in college football. So that's something to keep an eye on. I'm not going to be a believer in Penn State's overall effectiveness in the playoffs. And I like Drew Allar. I really do. And I think James Franklin has successful seasons, but the boomer bias, the amount of teams that you play that are worth a crap in your schedule, and you're 4-21 over your tenure at Penn State, that's unacceptable. And that's why people go after coaches like that. And that's why people criticize Ryan Day for not winning championships. And luckily he followed up with a championship last year. But that's why they have questions. And those people are asking themselves, well, why should we fire them? He has 9+ wins every year. We'll say, because the 3 losses are what you need to look at. The 3 losses are concerning. When you go hand-to-hand combat with Bowling Green last year. Granted, A&M did too. Maybe Bowling Green had something in the water over there. They had Harold Fannin, if you're an NFL fan, for the Cleveland Browns. But anyway, that covers the Big Ten outlook. Big 12 outlook. And this one's kind of quicker. Here's what I have written. I had Arizona State, Utah, and Baylor. They're kind of continuing to get their get back. And Baylor's quarterback, Sawyer Robinson, is absolutely a Heisman contender for, and Big 12 is going to be flashy, and it's going to be doing their 40 to 55 matchup games, and their games are going to take forever in the early window and the afternoon window slots because that's just what the Big 12 is. But when you look at it in perspective of, okay, Arizona State lost to Mississippi State. Well, Mississippi State went toe-to-toe with Tennessee, and now it's 4-1. So maybe they're not as bad as people claim them to be. So Arizona State's kind of recovering from that. Utah responded greatly to getting basically blown out in the second half by Texas Tech's backup and responding to that they blew out their opponent this week. But when you look at it in terms of the statistics in the Big 12, so you see, okay, points forced and things like that. Utah's up there. Utah has a very, very powerful offense, and I expect that to continue. And so that'll be interesting to watch with the Big 12, but those are some kind of like teams I wanted to highlight in there to say, all right, they're kind of getting their get back. I know Baylor lost to Auburn in week 1, but now they're up to 3-2, and they could start to climb the mountain with some more wins. And I do think Baylor, the reason I'm highlighting them is because their coach is on the hot seat and they're going to have to play harder than anybody else. But that's the only thing I think they have going for them is their head coach being on the hot seat, got to get some production, and Sawyer Robinson. I think those are the two primary factors of me highlighting Baylor there. Everything else is just meh. I don't believe they're a contender for the playoffs. I don't believe they're a contender for a national championship. But if they can get to 9-3, I think that's a very solid season and a great way to respond to say, okay, if we can get some pieces, we do have the right coach. We just got to get the pieces. And if we can compete in the NIL and the transfer portal and maybe possibly put something in Waco to attract players, maybe that's something too. But I think Iowa State and Texas Tech are leading this conference tenfold. I think Iowa State obviously had a fun, I think his last name's Becht, but had a fun Week 1 victory over Kansas State in Dublin. They have continued to win over and over again as the season has gone on. Texas Tech was on a bye, but Texas Tech doing what they did against Utah, all those rumors about, that oil and gas money pouring in and the NIL deals that they made and the transfer portal aggressiveness that they contributed to. Those are my two top front runners for the Big 12. And somebody to keep an eye on and I call them a fake dark horse team, but every year Baylor is like 5-0, and you're like, what the hell? Okay, we got to rank BYU, right? Those Mormons over there can play. And then as the season goes on, they play tougher Big 12 opponents, and they finish 9-3, but and they'll beat the crud out of Shadur Sanders in a bowl game, at the Alamo Bowl, but I don't believe them to be a threat, but people are going to talk about them and say, well, don't forget about BYU. And it's like, you can forget about them. They're not going to do anything. I promise you. All right. ACC outlook, and then we'll move into SEC outlook, and then we'll do predictions. But ACC outlook, the big one. We got to talk about this one, obviously. Florida State upset by Virginia, 46-38 in double OT. Now, I talked about this before, off the script, but we want to let's shout out the script a little bit on Florida State. Virginia is 4-1 now. And I get people are going to be, I'm going to make a bold statement here, okay? I'm going to make a bold statement. They played Alabama, right? They handedly beat them. And Tommy Castellanos had some swagger about him. He was in the Heisman race, and he's had kind of these two subtly poor performances since then. And then you obviously lose to Virginia. I think they beat Miami this upcoming week. I think Florida State goes, well, we can't lose this next game. It's a rivalry. Anything can happen. Miami is coming off a bye, and all signs kind of point to, well, Florida State lost to Virginia. How are they going to beat Miami? They're ranked number 3. Well, it's kind of the same thing like we saw against the Cowboys and Packers last night, if you're an NFL fan. What person in the world do you know that said Dallas is going to like in new ball, right? They knew football. They were a ball knower and said, Dallas is going to cover the spread. They're going to hit the back door here. They're going to win this football game or be within 3 points or whatever. No one. They were down so many players. They were down CeeDee Lamb. Their defense is 32nd in the league. They make Caleb Williams look like a fucking superstar, which is not what he is. No one's talking about that. Or no one bet on that. No one, even if they didn't have a bookie, they were like, no way. No one in their right mind. Well, it's the same thing with Florida State and Virginia. Now, somebody out there might have known some what does he know sort of thing. But Florida State, I think, gets their get back against Miami this upcoming week. And I think College Game Day is missing a really big opportunity to go to Florida and Miami. And they might have already been there earlier in the season. I think they did, actually. I think they were there last week, but I don't understand. That seems like a game you would really want to go to if you were College Game Day. Instead, we're going to Vanderbilt and Alabama in Tuscaloosa. But Tommy Castellanos is kind of dipping, right? We're not. The performance is not optimal in the last two games. I think he plays phenomenal against Miami. I think he's effective on the ground. He has some breakaways. And that's my bold prediction is that Florida State comes back, they beat Miami, and we're kind of seeing this around the college football since the scales have begun to balance, is that these teams don't stay undefeated forever. And that is something I'll bring up when we're doing predictions, but you're going to see a lot of teams start to lose, and you're going to be confused, but at the same time, you're going to have to adjust your scopes and go, just because they lost, just because this team is one loss does not mean they're out of the count. There's plenty of room, and the scales have balanced in recruiting and in conference and across the scales of college football. You have to adjust your scopes. You have to say, just because Alabama lost doesn't mean they're out for the count because they just beat Georgia. You have to look at it that way. And you have to be bold enough to say, well, I know Georgia lost, but I can totally see them climbing their way back into the top 5. So something to keep an eye on there. But yeah, Florida State upset by Virginia, hell of a win in double overtime. Georgia Tech barely survived Wake Forest. And man, Colin Klein for Kansas State back in the day, I don't know if you guys remember him. He's obviously now the offensive coordinator for the Texas A&M Aggies. But he was a Heisman candidate alongside Johnny Manziel. I think we're seeing a very similar player in Haynes King. I mean, he had 21 attempts in the ground for 100 plus yards because their running back was on a snap count. He was injured pregame. Still had the most carries out of the running backs with 10 for 21 yards. So severely limited on offense and had to really depend on Haynes King, who has been for 5 weeks a bell cow for the Yellow Jackets. And no, I don't think people are talking about Haynes King enough and what he has overcome since his basically his conception, the misconception around Haynes King being under Jimbo Fisher, not playing well, losing to Appalachian State at A&M and all at home and all these sorts of different things. He has really revived his college football career, and whether or not he plays at the next level or not, which I don't see him as a next level quarterback just because of his style of play, but in terms of college football, he really revamped his career. And doing what he does through the air and the bell cow running back mentality that he does as a quarterback is quite eye-opening, and he has really blossomed as a quarterback in college football. But they escape the upset versus Wake Forest without Jamal Haynes at running back and win 30-29, and they continue to win football games. Now, what you guys have all been waiting for, kidding, but the SEC outlook. Hey, LSU, this is what we were waiting on. This is the thing we were waiting on with LSU and Brian Kelly, is when are they going to drop a game? And like I just mentioned earlier, you can't count them out because they lost a football game against a very tough opponent. Not in this landscape. And Brian Kelly, it's not like they just ran all over him, but one of my favorite coaches in the SEC, and it's been tailored this way, and maybe I'm brainwashed, but it's been tailored this way for the last 2 years. It's Lane Kiffin. And the reason I like him is because he's spunky. He's got this swagger about him where he's like, well, I'm going to talk my shit on Twitter. My girlfriend, or it's not my girlfriend, my daughter's dating LSU's number one linebacker. And we're going to go in there. We're going to embarrass them. We're going to win with my backup quarterback. I don't need Austin Simmons. I'm going to get this guy to do it for me. And speaking of who this guy is, right? And I look at him, I always get his last name confused, which is why I'm trying to find him. But man, he put on a stunner against Arkansas when nobody. I expected that game to be a shootout. It was a shootout, and of course, Arkansas just fired their head coach. We'll get into that here in just a second. But Chambliss at Mississippi, Trinidad Chambliss, 6'1", 200 pounds, entered the transfer portal and came to Ole Miss, taking over for Austin Simmons. 23 of 39, 314 yards, a touchdown and a pick. Ran for 71 yards in the ground, and did his thing versus what we thought was the toughest defense in the SEC, being LSU. And what we're beginning to find out is, well, Clemson's like 1-3. We know that LSU hasn't won a season opener until this year. The last 3 or 4 years, they weren't able to do it. They also haven't been a major contender in the SEC with Brian Kelly as of yet. So we look at Lane Kiffin, who typically goes 9-3, 10-2, at worst 8-4. He's just always putting up these high offensive numbers year after year, talking his stuff. And who knows, maybe they should have been in the college football playoff last year. But them and South Carolina, the chaos last year was just a little bit too much of a mess to really articulate who should have been in and who should have been out. But shout out to Lane Kiffin over there, showing his daughter who raised her, if you will. That's the polite way to say it. But yeah, hey, another top 10 team loss for LSU, but don't count LSU out. And all jokes aside, I'm not a fan of Brian Kelly. I still think he's a cornball. And I think Lane Kiffin does talk a lot, but he's all about his business, which is why he's been increasingly my favorite SEC coach, and proves it again this year. But Brian Kelly is going to have to do some major recovering, because you look at the forecast, their schedule, and they got a bye week this upcoming week. But after that, they're going into South Carolina, who you really can't sleep on with the North Sellers. I understand they're not having as great of a season, and they're not going to have that great of a season, but you got them at home. That should be a dub. You're going at Vanderbilt. I think that's another dub, but that's a very tough matchup, and Pavia could easily upset you. Then you play A&M at home. That's a big-time football game. A&M will be possibly still undefeated at the time. Then you go at Alabama, play Arkansas at home, and play Western Kentucky with a throwaway game, and then go at Oklahoma at the end of the season. So you can possibly see 3 losses in here. 3 more for LSU if they don't tighten things up. And, of course, that's the SEC, but something to keep an eye on. Mississippi State's kind of a sleeper this year. Obviously, they beat Arizona State earlier in the season, which kind of shocked some eyeballs. Everybody's like, what? Mississippi State, they're usually 4-8, something like that. And they could very well end up 5-7, 6-6. And, they're definitely a lot better this year than they were years past. For example, going into overtime with Tennessee. And I think the biggest thing to highlight with Tennessee is their defense. Their defense is really struggling. I don't know if they're missing players, but that's back-to-back weeks in matchups where, or back-to-back SEC matchups to where this is happening. And I know Blake Shapen's a pretty decent quarterback at Mississippi State. It seemed like there was a lot of turnovers on the Tennessee side and things that shifted momentum back and forth. But for them to come out with a victory in this game by the skin of their teeth is a bit concerning. We thought they were one of the major contenders in the SEC, and they very well may be. But I'm starting to kind of look at Tennessee and going, okay, they're probably going to drop a game at some point that they shouldn't, because what they're doing defensively is not sustainable. And their next few games, again, we're going to talk about. They play their toughest opponents to wrap up the year as we continue to get to the midseason. You got Alabama in week 8, Oklahoma at week 10, and that's pretty much it. So I think they're going to be fine record-wise, but they're concerning to me. I don't think their defense has shown what it takes to win a national championship, let alone an SEC championship. So keep an eye on Tennessee. They could drop a game here in the next few weeks. And I'll talk about it here in a second when we get to the key matchup projections, but you're going to start to see the SEC conference schedule and the Big Ten and the Big 12 really start to collide and say, all right, one of these teams has to lose. So something to keep an eye on there. But Tennessee survives at number 15. I mean, of course, the big one of the weekend. Oh, actually, I'll highlight this one. Tribula in Missouri continue to roll. Tribula is having himself quite the outstanding season for Missouri. And, you look at the last 3 or 4 quarterbacks for Missouri being Drew Lock, Tribula, and Brady Cook. They've had some pretty good quarterbacks come out of Missouri, and Tribula seems to be the next man up. And I really like what he's doing over there. I don't think they have the strength to compete with the top tier SEC football teams in terms of depth, but their running back already has 700-plus rushing yards on the season. He has kind of entered the Heisman conversation, let alone just the best running back award for college football. He has really earned a name for himself, and I'll highlight his name for you guys. But this guy he had 130 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns versus UMass, which I understand that's kind of a throwaway game, but averaged 5.4 yards per carry, and that is Ahmad Hardy, 5'10", 206 pounds. And you look at his game log, too, to highlight. He hasn't had one football game under 100. He had only 10 attempts in week 1 for 100, 112 week 2, 250 in week 3, 138 in week 4, and 130 in week 5. And he has 6, 7, 8, 9 touchdowns on the year. He is absolutely playing phenomenal. So to highlight him is definitely worth noting. And then I already talked about Texas A&M leaving points on the board. I mean, they had over 200 yards on the ground. They really capitalized on the pass rush on third downs. Jackson Arnold he straight up wasn't able to get a single thing going on offense. He was seeing ghosts out there. He had a gimme rushing touchdown towards the end of the game, but Texas A&M, I think, missed 2 or 3 field goals. They had multiple touchdowns called back. I want to say it was 2. So I think I read somebody said 3, but I'm going to say they had a touchdown called back, 2 or 3 field goals missed. I think they left 13-ish to 17 points on the board once again, which was the same case versus Notre Dame. But what really impressed me was I was worried this was going to be a shootout. I predicted 31-24, but I felt like it was going to be this back and forth game of big electric plays, and Auburn did a good job of eliminating that with Mario Craver and KC Concepcion, who still had a great game. But special teams, I think, won the game for Texas A&M. They had a couple really good punt returns, and I think that's something to keep an eye on because Concepcion can be very electric in the punt return unit. But they ran the ball phenomenally. Le'Veon Moss was great, and that's something that they're going to have to continue to depend on as the season goes on. But the defense really stood up. I was highly impressed with the defensive line, highly impressed with the linebacker play. Torian York had a phenomenal game. So shout out to Texas A&M's defense. Playing at Kyle Field certainly helped as well. The 12th man did their thing. And then, of course, Alabama upsetting Georgia. Now, I wanted Georgia to win this game. My agenda was that Georgia was going to be the most consistent team throughout the entire season. And what I'm beginning to find out is Georgia's defense has some questions to it. But, I know it was only 24 points. If you truly watch this game, which I watched half of it, but when I look back on it, I said, okay, from what I saw, Alabama completely out-physical Georgia. I mean, it was big hit after big loss, after tackle for loss, after sack, after fumble. I mean, they got after them on defense completely. And I think that's a Kalen DeBoer notion of like, okay, well, the mainstream media says Kalen DeBoer can't coach. They say he's on the hot seat. They say he ain't Saban. Well, he ain't Saban, but he's also not a soft head coach. And I think that needs to be understood throughout the SEC is, look, this is a brand new head coach. We went from the greatest of all time to, okay, we went 9-3 last year, and now we're 3 or 4-1 this year with Ty Simpson, who was a new quarterback. Like, there are things in college football you have to consider, because it's not easy to just repeatedly retain players year after year. And, they were missing Jam Miller versus Florida State. Jam Miller's back now at running back. Ryan Williams is really starting to step up. So, hey, Alabama is still a very good football team. They're still a contender in the SEC. And Georgia losing this game by 3 doesn't mean that Georgia is not either. I still think Georgia's going to be 10-2, 11-1 to end the year. And I think they'll be playing in Atlanta, Georgia. But Alabama ain't no slouch either. And I think Alabama's on pace for another 9 to 10 win season. And, we'll hope so. I hope they are in contention for a playoff spot. I'd love to see Kalen DeBoer with a opportunity in the playoffs. But once again, another top 10 team loses in week 5 to renunciate how chaotic it has been in college football thus far. So I look at this. All these things kind of collaborated together. And I think to myself, the scales have truly balanced. And that's good, because we don't have this, we have this head coach he always wins no matter what the score is, or no matter what the opponent is or what the situation is. He's constantly going to win and constantly going to win national championships. It's a random box year after year in college football. It's a complete random box. And so that's what we've wanted for a long time. And I understand there are greats, that there need to be greats to say, well, you can't deny this coach's greatness or this quarterback's greatness. But enjoy this period where week after week, season after season, you don't know truly who's going to win. You really have to focus on who their previous opponent was, or who they're forecasting their upcoming schedule, or what players are missing, or, kind of going toe to toe statistically, analytically, and just kind of evaluating what the team is shaped like week after week, and who the coach is, looking at James Franklin going, okay, who's going to win the top 10 matchup? Well, James Franklin's 4-21. So I've just really enjoyed as a college football fan that has balanced out, and that there is no more infinity gauntlets. That it's more of, we still have the premium brands, and they have the larger budgets of NIL, and their capabilities of recruiting are greater, and there are coaches with greater recruiting strengths, and there are geographical locations with larger capabilities and the incentives to bring more players in. That still exists, but in terms of the talent pool, it's starting to spread out, and I hope that continues. Loyalty continues to increase, as that's a different topic to share the script on, but loyalty is not something that I believe exists in the majority in college football. But let's look at this. You could possibly go upset alert here for some key prediction matchups, but I'll keep it short and sweet. I'll do Texas A&M first, just because they're my team. Texas A&M playing Mississippi State at home, playing at Mississippi State. Mississippi State has looked pretty solid. They beat Arizona State. They whipped up on Tennessee's defense, but ultimately lost the game. I think Texas A&M is going to fire up offensively in this game. I think they're really going to amp things up and have some big splash plays. They were missing some of those last week, but there were a lot of points slipped in the scoreboard, and I think those translate into this week. And I think A&M gets a 35 burger on Mississippi State and wins the game by at least 10. So I'm predicting 35-24 Texas A&M in that matchup. And Mississippi State, don't get me wrong. I don't think they're bad. I just think A&M's a much better football team, and their defense is really starting to figure it out. And I hope it continues to translate in week 6. Go to College Game Day. This is Vanderbilt going to Alabama. Obviously, Vanderbilt being 5-0, Alabama 3-1, coming off a big victory at Georgia. I think Vanderbilt really plays close in this game. And I don't believe it's going to be necessarily a high-scoring game for Vanderbilt. But I do believe Alabama gets up there. I think Alabama wins this game 28-17 with Jam Miller returning. and Ty Simpson kind of been in his bag the last 2 weeks, I think Alabama continues to increase. And this is what I'm talking about. Vanderbilt's 5-0, and that's great, but they're not going to finish, like a premium SEC team. I don't think that they're that strong in depth. I understand Pavia's playing it great, but I don't trust it. I don't look at the record and go, holy smokes. I look at the record and go, well, it's Vanderbilt. And I know that's disrespectful, but I'm looking at Alabama continuing their streak, 28-17 victory at home. And then you go to the rest of the schedule. We got a couple more here. Something to keep an eye on is, where is this game? Is Texas Tech and Houston. This is your Big 12 prediction one. Houston barely escaped their previous matchup, and Connor Wegman didn't have the best of games last week versus Oregon State. When Oregon State is not a good football team, just simply put. And for them to go at Texas Tech, they keep switching them up on me. They're hosting Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech wins this game 38-20. And I don't know. Here's something to consider, actually. Texas Tech might not have Morton. I'm sure Morton, I don't remember his injury being significant. This is my pet peeve with college football. It's really tough to keep up with these things. But I don't think Morton has their quarterback. So when I look at that, I don't think Texas Tech is going to miss Morton in this upcoming matchup. And so whether he is there or whether he's not there, it really just depends on the production of the offense. But I'm thinking that if Morton plays, it's 38-20. If the backup plays, I think it's going to be, 24-17 Texas Tech. So either way, I think Texas Tech gets the dub versus Houston. Then the college game day, or not college game day, but then the ACC matchup, Miami versus Florida State. Florida State, I talked about it earlier, is going to upset Miami. That's my bold prediction of the week. I think Carson Beck's going to look pretty solid. But in a rivalry game, Florida State really needs a dub here this week. I think Tommy Castellanos has a phenomenal game on the ground and in the air, kind of showcasing his dual threat ability and that he is a good college football quarterback. And from there, we start to have more questions about the ACC and who's going to win the conference. But at the end of the day, I think these two are the front runners in the division. And there's some notable other ones as well. But for now, those are the two notable ACC contenders for me. And honestly, I think there might be a non-ranked matchup to highlight. But I mean, honestly, I think those are the 4 or 5 games that I really wanted to predict. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the rest of the schedule, I mean, it's all just there's kind of a fun one versus Michigan and Nebraska. I think Nebraska wins that one pretty handily. But yeah, that kind of wraps up the key projections for next week. That'll be interesting. All right. Well, this was the Shadow the Script College Football edition, and I appreciate you guys joining in. I had a good time talking ball and giving my opinions on this sort of stuff and shattering the mainstream agendas. But if you're not on the socials and you made it to the end of the episode, I'd really appreciate a follow on the YouTube channel at Shadow the Script, or you can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter, where we release 30 to 60 second clips highlighting our previous episodes. College football episodes are out every Tuesday. NFL episodes are out Thursdays, and you can follow us along as Season 3 of the STS Network continues. All right. Thank you very much. You guys have a good rest of y'all's week, and Giga Mags.